Brett, it's great to have you back on the road to autonomy. And I can't believe it, sir. It's your fourth time on the road to autonomy. And every time you come on, you give a masterclass in trucking economics. And today, for the audience doesn't know, we have very big news. You were the recently appointed president and COO of Bot Auto. First and foremost, congratulations, sir. Secondly, thanks for coming on. Why join Bot, Brett? You're an entrepreneur at heart. Why did you join Bot?
Well, first, thanks for having me back on for the fourth time. Hopefully, I provided enough value to justify uh, the recurrence. And thank you for the congratulations. I am an entrepreneur, and I do believe in building businesses and scaling them. But I don't believe that when you look at my career history, I spent 20 years working at night, which was probably the most entrepreneurial place that I could have worked. And so I had so much opportunity there to work directly with founders, which makes it feel like you're an entrepreneur. Then obviously, went out on my own, started a few businesses, had some successful exits there. And then when the opportunity came to come to Bot, I feel right at home here in terms of working side by side founders and entrepreneurs and people who have built businesses before, and then fortunate enough to continue to work with people who I value and that are a huge part of my success. And so when the opportunity came to come, it was a real no brainer for me. Just the ability to take my experience and my what I would call my freight education, and then get to work alongside just world class technologists and people who really challenge me to think deeper than I've probably ever thought before.
If you look at Teta, the gentleman that works with Shadi, when I was there for the Humanless run before you joined, we had some deep technical conversations. So Teta, thank you for recommending the Mes Hamas, the founder of DeepMind book. I learned a lot from that. Brett, when we look at you joining Bot Auto, the market it's saying it's like, okay, Bot's getting ready to commercialize and scale because you started in the trucking industry at 19, so you're bringing a lot of experience there. Is the market interpreting your hire as a signal that Bot is getting ready to scale commercial operations?
Yeah, I think I was really touched with the outpouring of support that I got when the announcement was made, and I think that I definitely think that it's a signal that we're serious, that Bot is serious. I think that the industry as a whole is got it's a huge spotlight on us this year. I think 26 has kind of been the year where people are really starting to take notice of the inevitability of it. And so I do think that it's been a signal. I've gotten so much support of, this makes so much sense in terms of, what my ambitions are and the things that I want to see happen in the industry. And so I definitely think that it's a signal of that. There's some other signals that happen that I wouldn't necessarily would say were like congratulatory things, but they were, there was some things and I just chuckled when it happened, but, and I'm not going to go into the details of it, but, the day of the announcement, and there happened to be another, a post, that day by somebody who I respect a lot about how far in the future autonomy trucks actually are. And so it felt very, the timing of it felt very funny to me, that they would bring up this old interview, and post it that day, which was funny to me. But no, I think it's a definite signal. I think that those who know me and know my understanding of freight and network and how network building actually happens, and know my history would look at it and say, okay, this is a serious move by Bot, and really a serious move by myself too, to move towards the commercialization of autonomy.
It is. A few months ago at dinner in Austin, Jason Calacanis said to me, "You getting attacked?" And I said, "No." He's like, "Well, now you're not doing something right." And lo and behold, I launched the Road to Autonomy Industries, and boy, I'm getting attacked every which way. So I guess I'm doing something right, and I guess that you're doing something right is how I'm interpreting that. And Bot as a company is doing something right. April 29th, We were there. We witnessed the first humanless run that the company achieved. It was impressive. Construction zones, all sorts of weird stuff. And I'm sure you saw the video of the motorcycle guy going 100 miles an hour by the circus over the bridge. And the bot truck handled that adverse situation, if you want to use the term. The people were trying to attack the truck, and the truck kept going very politely. When bot achieved that historic mission, what did you think?
Well, you know, I felt bad for all of my contacts here because, uh, and I think that you probably were with Robert the entire time, right? And
Yeah,
so I know that you guys were awake all night, but
yeah.
what I would say is that because of my conditioning of being in transportation for as long as I've been, I was up at 5 wondering what was happening. And so my text messages at 6 and 7 o'clock went unanswered because everybody had, finished for the night, and probably had gone to bed. So there was about a 5 hour period there in the morning where I was just wondering how it went, because our hours were off. But no, I was anxiously awaiting the culmination of that. Obviously at that particular time, we were still kind of finalizing the details of my transition in, and so I was kind of on pins and needles a little bit just to hear how it went. I never doubted it. Again, I've known Chowdy for such a long period of time. And so, and the great thing about Chowdy is that, everybody that I've spoken to after the announcement, the answer always is, well, we know that he's going to build a world-class technology. And so I never doubted it, but it was just so amazing to see. And I remember that morning I shared it with my boys that it happened, and they knew that it was happening. That morning they asked how it went, and it was like we felt success even though we weren't part of the team yet, and so. But no, that's a big signal of the capability, right? Um, so you have that, and then you have, some, obviously me coming over, what that signals, and then, some other things that have been happening that have been really good for us. It's just setting us up for success.
To me, it was a magical time. And as the audience knows, Robert and I are dear friends, and we had some really incredible conversations of watching history unfold. And you're right. We get back early in the morning. Robert's like, "You gonna go to bed? You gonna go to bed?" Yeah. Call my daughter. How'd it go, Dad? Awesome. Okay, going to bed. Well, I went to bed for 2 hours, and lo and behold, Robert and I are back up and back at it again, and creating more content. So it was a historic moment. When should the market look for more humanless runs from Houston to Dallas?
That's a great question, and I mean we could do it today, and we could do Dallas back to Houston today. We have that capability. It takes there's other considerations that you have to make in terms of, how does your freight work, and your customer, and all of those things. We have no issues doing it from a technology perspective or from a regulatory perspective. But we also, I mean, you were there. How many support vehicles did we have with it? And so you have to start thinking about, like, okay, when and how are we going to start doing this? Let's say we start doing it monthly, and then we push that down to weekly, and then down to daily, right? Like that's kind of like our methodology. And so, but we want to make sure that, we know that we can do it. Okay, how do you do it, and how do you generate the economics to make it make sense to do, with all of, the chase vehicle and all that kind of thing that was part of the original event. So, we're ready to go. We just need, we need some other things specifically around freight and how the freight works, and those types of things to move forward.
And then, I mean, you technically need the chase car because the warning triangle issue until that gets resolved is Is the economics of the humanless runs, is that one of the things that you're spending most of your time on, how to build that model and to profitably scale that model?
I would say that the ability to build the humanless mile is less of the economic concern around as much as building the right network through lane selection, through corridor building, through network building, which is really a sequencing problem that you have to solve for, which we have solved for. And so from a macroeconomic perspective, what I mean by macro, I mean like thinking about the entirety of our system, right, and looking at it from the largest global view possible. And how do we sequence our lane builds in such a way that maximizes network mile creation, and then ultimately maximizes economic benefit to the company. And then in the proper sequencing, how much network optionality are we building into it? And so, um, so like I'm working on the most fascinating things that I've worked on in some time, because I'm getting to really think about, how are we doing from a sequencing perspective, and what is the key unlock, that from a network perspective, that sequencing makes sense, and then how much optionality are we getting from it? And so, those are the things that I'm most concerned about, because from my seat, optimization and utilization are the problems that we're solving for, and those are problems that most people don't talk about when they talk about autonomy. They talk about the tech to the tech that drives the truck autonomously, and in the world that I live in, that's a solved problem. And so now we have to be thinking about how do we build the business around optimal and high utilization.
Some things never change. There's consistency here, Brett. For the last 3 episodes you were on, optimization, utilization, focused on cost was a common denominator of all 3 times that you've been on the road to autonomy. I'm curious, you're sitting there in your office and let's say you have a map of the United States with lanes. How do you start to pick a lane and then go to investigate that lane as you start to build out this network?
Well, I mean, part of the investigation just relies on, like inherent institutional knowledge from participating in, I don't know. They say that you're not a master of anything until you spend 10,000 hours doing it, right? I can assure you I've spent 10,000 hours looking at RFP responses for shippers. And so, so from a freight network design perspective, um, I, I I have no doubt that number is well north of 10,000 hours. And so I think that there's that element of it, right? And then there's also other things that you can use in terms of freight, and you can, of course, you could use DAT, you could use sonar, you could use gen logs, you can use anything that you want. You also can use your repository of all of those RFPs that you've participated in, that you have kept. And so my database of what freight moves in what lane is extensive, and not only from knowing it, but also just from you know every RFP that comes in, you take the lane and the volume and you put it into your database, right? And so we know where freight moves, and look, anybody who works at a trucking company, specifically in their general management team, which is probably the team that responds to the RFPs, knows exactly what I'm talking about. And so freight is pretty predictable in terms of the lanes that it moves in, specifically contract freight. Now there's variations to volumes based off of awarded volume and award realization, but the fact is that freight's pretty predictable. Um, and one of the things that I love about the business that we're building here is, for the first time, and I'm going to use this concept, is that we're building a freight business, a trucking business that has deterministic outcomes. And I feel very confident in saying that. I feel very confident in saying that we will be able to have deterministic outcomes in our performance, um, because freight is, it's pretty easy to understand. And then now that we have, a capacity offering that's completely elastic, now you can come back into the optimization and utilization and the optionality component of it, which is then how you deploy that elastic capacity. But the reality is that it all leads to deterministic outcomes.
You also take into account seasonality as well.
Oh, certainly, certainly. When I have to speak with laymen in the industry, right, that don't really necessarily understand how freight markets work, I kind of explain that like the cyclicality of it is a very large rolling hill, right, and then the seasonality of it is a smaller rolling hill, right, and then the supply demand, um, you know inequality is like this, right? And so you have these three different things all moving in at one particular point in time, and so you definitely are aware of the current market cycle. Then you're also aware of the current seasonality, and then you also have to deal with the day to day inflections of supply and demand imbalances. And that's where us, when we think about building a native AI orchestration platform to optimize everything, which is what I'm charged with helping do. Then you start to be able to instead of having a demand curve that is all over the place based off of you know seasonality or inbound outbound market differentiations or whatever, you really can predict where you need to move your capacity, and because you've built your network in such a sequenced way, you have the optionality to do so, and you can move that capacity along the network in the most optimal way to give you the deterministic outcome that you've programmed for.
I'm going to simplify this, but should we think about a network where the lane is the Ethernet cable, the hub is the router, and everything is interconnected back to a central point? Is that how we should think about network architecture for a bot?
No, I wouldn't necessarily look at it like that. I would look at it um, more like a utility grid.
Why would you look at it as a utility grid? Just based on demand?
Well, it's a demand, yeah, it's a demand driven system, right? Like trucking is a demand driven system. For everything we want to say, you know, when you look at what's happening in the current world that we're living in from a where we're at in a market cycle perspective, is that it's a capacity driven. Our current market cycle is a capacity driven cycle, which is not typical. Typically, cycles are always, predicated on a shift in demand one way or the other. And so we're in a different market cycle from an origin story perspective. If we were also experiencing a demand cycle right now, the freight market would be like insane. It would be insane if there was also a demand event that was occurring with this current capacity event. And so what I would encourage people to be thinking about when they think about bot is that we're building a utility of capacity. And when I think about capacity, I don't think about truck counts in a market. I'm thinking about what's the total amount of available hours I have to sell in a market on a given day. And then how do I ingest my demand to match my capacity?
The big difference is when you're fully autonomous, you don't have hours of service regulations. So you could potentially, I'd say potentially, increase the amount of capacity you have.
100%. I don't think it's a potential. I think it's a given. But my point being is that if I'm looking ahead, 4 days from today, I'm going market by market and understanding how many hours of capacity I have available to sell. And so, we shift from the concept of tractors and tractor counts to the concept of capacity nodes on a network.
Do you think your competitors are thinking along these same lines? Or are they thinking in a more traditional sense, would you say?
I'm going to push back on you because I'm going to ask you to define competitor to me.
To me, a competitor, well, that's a very good thing. And I do appreciate the pushback. To me, you have your competitors in autonomous trucking. And then you have, say, the outer ring, you have your more of your traditional trucking companies.
So I would classify the other AV players as comparators. Okay, I wouldn't classify them as a competitor to us. I'd classify them as a comparator. And then the traditional trucking companies, who, by the way, I love and respect every single one of them. Okay. Traditional trucking has moved and delivered goods for America for a long, long period of time, created a tremendous amount of jobs, created a tremendous amount of benefit to the overall economy in the US. And so, do I think that those if I was competing against those, do I think that they're thinking about it in the same way that we're thinking about it? No, I don't. I think that they are they're great companies that for the most part, when you think about a lot of them, not all of them, but when you think about a lot of them, they're family businesses. Their names are on the sides of the truck. There's a tremendous amount of pride associated with the businesses that they built and the communities that they served, and all of those great things that those companies have done. And they're some of the most giving organizations that you can come across in terms of in their local communities. And so when I think about them from a competitor perspective, do I think that they view things through a different lens? I absolutely think that they do. I think that they view the business through the lens of Billy and Johnny and Susie that drive their trucks for them, and that's exactly how they should be viewing their business. I think that when we view our business, we view it through the lens of, can we build the safest transportation mode? Can we build the highest level of service? Can we build the highest level of elasticity of supply? And so those are the things that I think that we think of, while they're thinking of, look, it's not like I don't pay attention to, every single million miler that, Shelly Simpson congratulates on LinkedIn, or that Knight Swift congratulates on LinkedIn, right? That's a big deal. And those drivers deserve to be celebrated. I mean, Hunt just had a million miler in Memphis that hit 5 million miles. Like that's such a big deal that Brett Sant, who's like the senior vice president of safety for Knight Swift, commented on how big of a deal that was. And so we should be celebrating those things, and that should be where they're focused. And so our comparators in the AV development space have a different agenda and a different business model. And then if we're thinking about competing with traditional trucking companies for the movement of goods, yeah, we look at things differently. But that doesn't mean that the way that they've done it, and look at the market caps of them, they've been wildly successful doing it. And so we want to have success. We want them to have success. The reality is that this industry happens to be large enough to where an independent owner operator can have success, an autonomous trucking startup can have success, and the largest in the industry can continue to be successful.
You bring up a very valid point that I want to emphasize, that traditional trucking companies, they're great stewards of their community. They give back a lot, they do a lot, and I think it's really cool because they support a lot of youth baseball and youth sports. They do a lot of good into the truck drivers, the million milers, the 5 million milers. Thank you for your service. I couldn't do it. I don't like to drive, and you have this incredible gift to drive. So thank you for doing that, and keep on trucking for that, because you bring the goods to us that we need. On the autonomous side, how would you say your model differentiates compared to your peers in the autonomous trucking, not traditional?
Yeah. So what I would classify as our comparators, right? Those that are building AV, AV trucks. I think that the general thesis that they have gone down has been to build a driver as a service. And so they build the sensor array, they build the compute stack, they build the software that powers it, um, and and then they want to package that and sell it at some cost per mile to their customer, who is a trucking company. Um, and I was a customer for a long time, potential customer for a long time in that model, and waiting for delivery of AV trucks. And there's a couple things from that, is that their customer um, is not the shipper, and so they're removed from from the actual freight. So there is in that particular alignment, the trucking company becomes the intermediary between the AV developer and the shipper. And so there's an intermediary relationship there. Then you're charging a cost per mile for the utilization of the driver as a service. And there's a lot of questions around the dependency on that relationship with one another. And what I mean by the dependency is that the trucking company customer is dependent on the AV developer to bringing on new lanes, and building the network. It's not based off of what the individual trucking company needs from a network design perspective. And so the trucking company becomes dependent on the AV developer for building the network, that may or may not fit their network. Okay. And so there's that dependency. There's the dependency on the AV developer, that the trucking company take delivery of the truck and then fully utilize the truck, which may not be possible in the network development that the AV company has done, right? And so I think that there's a lot of dependency there. And then again, you're removed from the actual customer, which in the world that we live in, whether we like it or not, everybody is just trying to get wallet share of the shipper. That's why shipper conferences are so sought after for attendance, right? And so the reality is everybody's trying to get as close to the shipper as possible. And so I don't want to be removed from the shipper, right? So our go to market strategy different. Okay, we have a direct relationship with the shipper, and then in addition to the direct relationship with the shipper, we can decide to build our network around our shipper demand, um, if we so chose, or we can build it around overall market demand, the way that we want to build our network. And so we don't have, and then again, from a utilization perspective, we're going to build network, and then we're going to deploy capacity, and we're going to control our own destiny and whether or not that capacity is being optimized and utilized. And so again, I like our business plan of not being dependent, um, whereas I think our competitors have, not only are they dependent on their customers, from a utilization and optimization perspective, and they're removed from it too, right? Like they're not connected to the utilization and optimization, and then their customer is dependent on them to build a network that works for them. And I'm never going to be like publicly critical of anybody specifically, but sometimes there's just some things that happen in terms of like network development that I just scratch my head and say that just doesn't really make a lot of sense that they would build that particular lane. And if I was a customer of them, I would say, I don't really understand why you're spending the time to build that lane. Why aren't we focusing on some other areas that would be more beneficial for me as the customer? And so I like the not having to be dependent on a third party. And that's how I would look at it, is it's a third party in either direction.
You're retaining optionality. With the optionality comes CapEx. Do you think the market is prepared for the increase in CapEx?
The CapEx thing is an interesting one. First off, from a network build perspective, network expansion perspective, our strategy for network expansion is such that we will be exceedingly capital efficient in bringing significant amounts of network miles online. Okay, and much lower than our competitors. Okay, from a network expansion perspective. The CapEx that you're really, I think, trying to get to though is the trucks and the trailers, right? And the reality of that is that there is a lot of trucking companies that have scaled to significant size through organic growth, through contract rates, and great financing relationships. And we happen to have those great financing relationships. We happen to know those people. We happen to know the experiences of great friends of ours that have scaled businesses to 500 trucks to 1,000 trucks to 1,500, 2,000, 3,000 through typical financing methods. And so we would not be raising money to go and buy depreciating assets that are operations assets that we could otherwise finance in a very normal way that every other trucking company that has scaled has done it. And so we're very confident that we will be able to scale not only from a network expansion perspective in a very capital efficient way, but when you think about how we're going to scale, our tractor and trailer counts, we're gonna use a very old school playbook that has been the same playbook that has scaled the largest trucking companies, and it just involves a great banking relationship, a tremendous sales force, and then the ability to execute and drive net income and EBITDA.
So just for clarification, I'm assuming on the traditional trucking side, there are dedicated banks or funding mechanisms that are already in place that are already accustomed to funding trucks and trailers.
Yes, sir. It's a huge business.
Okay, so then to me that takes away a risk. And you gave an interview recently where you brought up a fascinating risk to your competitors, if I'm using the term right. You talked about there's an inherent risk of operating a mixed fleet. And when I say a mixed fleet, a fully autonomous fleet and a human driven fleet. Could you talk about what you meant with that risk in the interview that you gave?
Well, yeah, the risk really comes down to trade-offs and optionality. If you are operating autonomy in a limited network design, what that means is that your autonomous truck has a limited optionality to operate. And so in that particular example that I was giving is that if you have Johnny who's worked for your company for 12 years and he runs from Houston to Phoenix, and you also happen to have a autonomous truck in that market that day that from an optionality perspective only can run from Houston to Phoenix because you don't have a corridor set up, you don't have a robust network build out, and you have one load. Like, who do you give the load to? Do you give it to Johnny or do you give it to the AV truck? Right now, you might only have one load to Phoenix out of Houston that day, but you may have 15 loads from Houston to Atlanta. And Johnny would be a perfect candidate to move that load from Houston to Atlanta, cover another load for your customer, service your customer, and give the load for the AV truck to Phoenix and service that load and cover that load. But Johnny doesn't go to Atlanta. He goes to Phoenix. That's what he does. He's been doing it for 12 years. There's no good outcomes of that conversation, right? You can give the load to the autonomous truck and make that truck productive, and you can have Johnny not do anything that day, and that's not going to be good. That's not a good outcome for Johnny. You can try to force Johnny to go to Atlanta. That's not going to be a good outcome for Johnny, and it's not going to be a good outcome for the company because the second that happens, Johnny is looking for another place of employment to go take his great abilities and skills to. Or you can sit your AV truck and give Johnny the load, fail a load to Atlanta, and make your AV truck unproductive. Okay. And so when I look at, and again, not being publicly critical of anybody, but when I look at announcements around, we're going to deploy this and we're going to bring this amount of trucks in, and you look at the network that exists for AV, I just don't see how you can do it without having a huge sacrifice to productivity, utilization, optimization, and how it's not going to be disruptive to your general driving fleet. Now, the other thing too is like we have to like be honest with ourselves in terms of, and this is the thing that, and I'm probably going to get a lot of heat from this, Grayson, but I'm going to share it with you. Is that when we talk about there is not a shortage of drivers that are willing to go from Houston to Phoenix twice a week. There's just not a shortage of drivers for that. Okay. We can talk about the driver shortage all we want. But there is not a shortage of drivers to drive from Dallas to Phoenix every single week and back. There's just not. Okay. The driver shortage, some people would say there is one, some people would say there isn't one. Right now, there's a capacity shortage. There's no question that we're in a capacity-driven market. But the reality of it is when you talk about autonomy and you look at the lane network build-out that people are focusing on, they sure aren't focusing on the lanes and building the lanes that there is a driver shortage in. They're building out the lanes that have the greatest amount of density. The greatest amount of density equals the greatest amount of consistency. The reason that people are focused on that from an AV perspective is because AV, in order to reach its full potential, has to have consistency and repetitiveness. Those are the very best driving jobs that exist. And so when our comparators talk about driver shortage, I don't understand what they're saying when you look at the build out of their network and the freight that they are wanting to put into autonomy. And so then I look at the customers of those and how they're planning on deploying autonomy. And again, I think you're going to come down in that mixed fleet scenario where you're going to have to make trade-offs. And those are going to be very, very tough trade-offs to make.
Mixed fleets, as you elegantly described, are clearly risk. One, I don't think the market understands that risk. And from a market perspective, the market rewards the Dallas to Phoenix. They rave about, oh, look at the distance, look at the distance. Do you think that, and this is just an assumption, that one of the reasons some of these lanes are chosen because of the distance in the market roars about the distance of look at this, it's multi-state, look at how far it is, but not truly going, if you want to say, below the line, which you so eloquently described?
Yeah, I mean, first, if we're going to take the time, and again, sometimes I look at it and I say, I don't understand why they're taking the time to develop that particular lane. But if we're going to take the time to develop a lane, it has to make economic sense. And in order for it to make economic sense, there's an element of the length of haul. There's an element of the efficiency of that length of haul. There's obviously the underlying economics around what that particular origin and destination pairing yields from a rates perspective. And then there has to be a certain level of density that exists in order to be able to justify building it. And you take all of those things into consideration. And the reality is that the AV lanes are going to be in some of the best corridors to move freight. And that often means that you're going to have to make tough trade-offs if you're operating a mixed fleet, when you're looking at deciding, okay, is Johnny going to haul the load today or is the AV truck going to haul the load today? And because you've not fully built out your network in a sequential way, what happens is that you have no optionality for that AV truck. And so the math is the math. It's like Tata's office is next to mine. Okay.
Hmm.
There's no question that he's a genius and he can do math that I can't even dream of doing. Right. But freight math is not overly difficult to do. And so the reality is that the math is not hard to do. And, there's a lot of things that you got to fix in order to make autonomy work. And there's going to be trade-offs and there's going to be tough conversations and tough questions, especially in a mixed fleet. And so, again, I wish everybody well in the industry because, I definitely believe in, that if we all do well, the industry does well. And so I want everybody to do well. But when I say everybody, I'm not just talking about, the comparators in the AV developer side and the trucking company side, but I'm talking literally about Johnny too. And so I want everybody to do well in our industry. It's large enough to support everybody. Anytime I meet a driver and we talk about, the work that I do, the question that they had, well, is it going to replace me? And I said, anybody who's a driver today can retire a driver. There's no question that that's the case. And so is it, an element where we have to continue to innovate and we have to continue to find new ways to be, leaders in the industry and leaders in society and leaders for consumers and even leaders for driving associates. 100%, we're obligated to do those things, and we just have to do it in a, we have to run our race at Bot. And again, others have been, I wish them nothing but wild success. But that looks different for everybody.
No, you're right. And I'm in the same boat. I want everybody to win. And as you and I know, at some point, consolidation is going to come and the market's going to vote one way or another. As Bot grows as a business, you in the role of COO, how do you ensure the business stays disciplined as it grows and it just doesn't grow for the sake of growing?
It's a really great question. I think that people who know me well, Grayson, they would describe me as having high expectation and very low tolerance. Um, and so, so those are, although I have definitely softened around the edges as I've gotten older. But I think that there's, I have to give all the credit to Chowdy and the world, for recognizing that myself and David and Jessica are the right three people to bring a significant element of discipline um, and a thoughtful and intentional approach to how we grow. And so I've very quickly come in and been able to work directly with Tata on what does our 4-year roadmap look like from a lane development perspective, and specifically why. Come back and overlay that with a very, very comprehensive financial model that outlines exactly what the financials will be, along with the truck growth by quarter for the next 5 years, and what that equates to in terms of our march towards 1 billion autonomous miles. And so, so I think that from that perspective, I'm the right person for that job, simply because I learned that at 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. I was 27 years old, and ran the largest division of night transportation. I got a tremendous amount of education by fire on how to grow a business in a disciplined and profitable way. And so I just think that it's a combination of world-class technology and then a proven track record of professional leaders in building and scaling profitable businesses.
Where do you see Bot in 4 years? Picking up on that Tata conversation.
Well, 4 years is exactly the timeline that I have in terms of our network build out. I believe that we will be able to move 1 billion autonomous miles in 4 years.
Billion miles in 4 years is impressive. And as we look to wrap up, what are the signals that the market should look for as bot grows and you look to hit those billion miles?
I think, we're in the process of taking the work that we've done thus far in terms of what does the next 4 years look like, and distilling that down to more manageable pieces, right? And so when you start to see what our network build looks like, and then our ability to onboard customers, um, again, we're going to grow our business very organically, like any other trucking company has, where demand um, is the catalyst behind bringing on more assets. And so I think that you're going to start to see, as time goes on here, you're going to start to see more material from us around, staking our claim in terms of what exactly we're doing and the sequence in which we're going to do it, and then what that does to unlock our business, and then customer acquisition to go with it. And again, coming back to the central theme that you had asked about us versus them is that we're not dependent on a third party to run our race, and that's, I think, something that is the most exciting thing for me, is that I'm no longer dependent on a third party to help me build the company that I want to build. And people who know me know that this is what I want to do. Like, I've wanted to build a fully autonomous trucking company since 2017. And so, you're coming in on 10 years of that, and I no longer have the constraints of reliance, right? And so now it's the ability to say, okay, these are the things that we have to do, and instead of like having a call with somebody, now I just walk into Teta's office and say, okay, like, this is what we need to do. How do you feel about that? And his response, and we go back and forth, and we say, okay, like, what do we can, what can we do on a timeline? How do we prioritize those types of things? So I'm just more energized than I've ever been, simply because I have no more constraints. It's all incumbent now on just going and doing the work.
Summarize this way: Bot's building a business, and Brett's there to see it's a disciplined, profitable business. The future is bright, the future autonomous, the future is Bot Auto. Brett, thanks again for coming on the road to autonomy, and we can't wait to have you on once again for your 5th time.
Thank you so much, Grayson.
Billions and soon trillions in value will be created in the autonomy economy. By the time a trend becomes consensus, the alpha is already gone. The gap between uncovering signals and reading headlines is widening fast. When it's a headline, it's no longer a signal. Enter Autonomy AI. We decode signals before they move markets, giving you conviction in the autonomy economy. Autonomy AI. Your models, our intelligence. Visit AUTNMY.ai.